Any questions till this stage? Otherwise, we can move on to the cost of equity. All right, let's move on then. Let's talk about the cost of equity. Now, there is, okay, Meher, the significance of discounting. As I explained one more time, the significance of discounting is if there is an absolute cash that we expect to receive in future, the real worth of that cash as of today would be lower. And that is called discounting and bringing it back to the present value, account for the difference in the time value of money. So if you put, let's say, 100 rupees in a bank account for a period of 1 year, and after 1 year, the bank pays you 110. So the way to look at it is that 100 today is going to become 110 in 1 year. Or in other words, 110 1 year later is worth only 100 as of today. So when you take current value to the future value, it's called you are increasing it, you are compounding it. But right now we have a future value which we are trying to bring to the present value. That's called discount. And that happens at a certain rate, and we are basically trying to figure out what that rate is. All right. Now, there's another question that what if there is the repayment of debt or some sort of a debt being raised in between? So don't worry about that, Prachi. So the approach that we are using over here is we are just looking at the cash flows that the firm is generating. Now, how the movement is happening between debt and equity, that is of no relevance to us because right now we're talking about the real cash which is being generated by the core operations of the company. That's how we are using. Right? Now, Vishaki, you have a question related to the valuation of a banking company or an NBFC. We cannot use this TCA concept out there. For valuation of a banking company, there is a different method which is used because over there, most of the times we tend to see what is the excess capital which can be used for payment of dividend because there we have this concept of borrowing and lending which is part of the normal operation. So we can't really use this logic over there. What we do over there is we try to figure out that if the equity shareholders have put in money today, they are doing it with an expectation of receiving cash flows in future. But they can only receive the cash in the form of dividend if it is over and above the required capital to be maintained to meet the capital adequacy ratio requirement. So there we see that the stipulated capital adequacy requirement is say 12% for instance, and in 1 year I've got 14% capital adequacy ratio. So we take that delta and we figure out what is the amount of capital that can be released back to the shareholders in the form of dividend. That helps you to do the valuation over there. That's called dividend discounting model combined with the excess capital method. So it's totally different. So you can't use this model, DCM model for a banking company because of this. Right? So Rohan, to your point, the logic behind cost of debt is post taxes because FCFA we are taking interest expense. You have aligned both. That's correct. You got it right. And Vishaki, another point is if any loan is taken from RBI or the government. If you're talking about any company other than banking, then I'm assuming that's your question. Because for a banking, as I said, the approach is totally different. So we cannot mix this logic with the banking company. But for any other company like camera manufacturing company case that we're talking about, from anybody, no matter who that person is or who that entity is, we will take it as part of our effective interest rate and then do it accordingly. Right? There's no distinction in terms of the party who is going to give it to us. All right. So so Prachi, we don't have to capture the future capital structure changes. Leave that part. As I said, what we are trying to do, we're trying to see that in future, if I do my business, this is how my operations are going to be, and this is what the cash flow would be, which is giving me a value, firm value of so and today. In future, I can keep on taking a decision related to the capital structure, but that's of no relevance to us right now. But how that will become relevant, just give me 5 minutes, I'll come to that point because there is this concept of weighted average cost of capital which could capture this point. So just be with me for 5 minutes, you will automatically get the answer. Right? Okay, so let's come back here. Now it's talking about the cost of equity. So there is no standard approach for cost of equity. And here we need to understand this part, that if I am a shareholder who is looking to invest money in one company, then that is my perspective as to what is the return I expect to generate from this company. But if there is some other investor who is looking to invest in that particular company, he or she would have his own perspective of putting the money by desiring a certain rate of return. So what we have to do over here is we have to understand that there is no standard approach for computing cost of equity. So there is still some model which has been created to figure out some logic behind the cost of equity, but there is no standard approach for it across the globe. There is no standard. It is your perspective. That is why you would notice that if there is a venture capital who puts in money, he may expect 40% return from the investment, but if the company stabilizes and some other investor is coming in, that person may expect 20% return. So it all also depends on the stage at which the investment is being done, the risk profile being assumed by the investor. All of that will decide the cost of equity. So there is this model which is pretty common, and that's called CAPM model. The CAPM model stands for Capital Asset Pricing Model, which is used for this can be used for finding the cost of equity. So what it says is that as per this model, the cost of equity, the desired return of the equity shareholders, is basically benchmarked to a risk-free asset. So they say that what is the risk-free rate of return? So let's say the government of India has issued a 10-year bond, and that is being traded at a yield of say 6%. So 6% becomes a benchmark rate for me, because if I'm going to put in money, government of India bond is giving me 6%, then I would at least require the 6% return. Is that something which the government of India is giving? And that typically is the risk-free rate, at least for that matter in that particular country, because it is not likely that the government will default, right? So that's how the risk-free rate is. That's the standard for us in any economy. That risk-free rate is the safest rate that you could assume if you are doing business in that particular economy. So that is the benchmark rate. Now, risk-free rate, so you have this question, that is it after tax or before tax? No, it is basically the long-term government bond yield. So you don't have to adjust it for any tax figures, because it depends on the person who is receiving it. So leave that part. It is typically the rate which is being offered by the government. So we take a long-term bond yield. It could be a 10-year bond, it could be 20-year bond, it could be 30-year. And if you would like to see it, you could go to the website of RBI, you could check Bloomberg, you could check investing.com. There are a lot of websites which basically publish this data on a real-time basis. So you could use it, you could refer to it from there. So RBI website would also be providing the risk-free rate, which is basically the government bond yield. Now, what you do after this, you basically add the equity. You basically add the equity risk premium. But so you're saying that I'm taking some extra risk. If I'm going to put my money in the CMC company, which is camera manufacturing company, I'm basically because I don't know how the business is going to perform in future. But at least if I had put in my money in the government bond, I would have been guaranteed a rate of return of 6%, right? So you basically take the long-term government bond. It could be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Broadly, the yield as of now is roughly about 6 to 6.2%, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's 6% approximately as of now for a long-term government bond yield, and I'm referring to the 10-year government bond, right? So 10-year long-term bond is a common bond which is typically issued by most of the countries, right? So I personally use 10-year government bond yield. Then what I'm going to do, that if I'm going to invest in this CMC company, then I'm taking some extra risk. So I would definitely require some sort of a premium for assuming that extra risk of investment in this company. So what we typically do, we say that in the camera manufacturing, the CMC company is basically into camera manufacturing, and the industry in India, I've seen that there are 10 companies which are there in this domain, and on an average, I've seen in the market, they have generated a return of 15% in past. Right? They have generated a 15% return in past. That's typical average market return. So once you see what is the market return, let us say that is 15%, and let us assume the risk-free rate is 6%. So what we mean by this is that if the market has generated a return of 12%, 15%, and the risk-free rate is 6%, so the market is offering a premium of 9%. On an average, it is offering me 9% premiums. If I have to put in money in the equity of any organization, I would at least command a market premium of 9%. So then I see that this industry of camera manufacturing is offering 9% premium, but my company is having a slightly different capital structure. It is having a different debt equity profile versus the others, because of which there is some sort of a riskiness factor which is applied to it. And that riskiness factor is technically called beta factor, which indicates the riskiness of the company. And let us say that we try to figure out by combining the correlation of the return that my company could give versus the other companies can give. So that's what we typically do here. For a listed company, you could find it out, but let's say if there is an unlisted company, we don't have a basis to work it out properly. So what we do, we basically look at the beta factor of those companies. In case you're trying to value a company which is unlisted, you find out the beta factor of listed comparables. So I would figure out that what is the beta factor of the listed comparable. So I would put that beta factor over here for company A, company B, company C. Let's say the beta factor is 1, 1.3, 0.7, something like that. Then what I will do to be able to find out the beta factor for my company which is unlisted, I'm going to first of all look at what is the debt equity ratio of these companies. So this company is having a debt equity ratio of 0.8. This is having 1.5 is to 1. This is having 1.3 is to 1. Something like that. This beta by default it is called levered beta. This by default is called levered beta. Then you look at their debt equity ratio, and if these companies are listed only, then you will be able to figure out the levered beta from the website. So today, if you need to see the beta factor of the company, you can just go to the website of moneycontrol.com, search for the company, and on the first page itself, you will be able to see the beta factor. So you either check Money Control, or you have some other sources to pick the data. You can go to that website as well and figure this out. So once you have got that beta factor, you also see what is the typical debt equity ratio that the company enjoys. Then you can unlever this beta. So the way we unlever the beta is all of this that I'm discussing. As I said, I'm going to upload an article in the 9th August folder today, which was authored by me some time back, that covers all of these concepts in detail. So just in case you want to revisit the logic, you can go through the article once. So unlevered beta is typically indicating that if you eliminate the impact of the capital, because debt equity ratio of 0.8 is to 1 is that debt is 0.8, equity is 1. So that's how you work out the debt equity ratio. So unlevered beta is you are trying to remove the impact of debt. You are trying to find out the beta factor excluding the capital structure differences, assuming everything is equity. At an asset level, at the company level, forget about debt. If there was no debt, what would be the beta? That's what we are trying to figure out. So this is usually computed as the levered beta, which is basically after considering the debt component. So you take the levered beta divided by 1 plus debt equity ratio into 1 minus tax percentage, then close it up. This is how we typically compute the unlevered beta. So what it says is that you take the levered beta, which is available with you, you divide it by 1 plus debt equity ratio into 1 minus tax rate. Let us assume tax rate of 30%. Whatever it is, we will take it and then accordingly compute the unlevered debt equity ratio or unlevered beta factor. Right? So I've taken 1 into this divided by this. This is again 1.3 divided by 1 plus 1.5 into 1 minus 30%, and finally 0.7 divided by 1 plus 1.3 into this. So then you can say that on an average in the market, ABC have got this unlevered beta. So if I have to work out the average unlevered beta, it is equal to average of these three, which is roughly about 0.55. And then I'm going to say that CMC has got a debt equity ratio of whatever it is. Let's say it is, I'm just assuming that let's say it is 0.85. Let's assume it is 0.85. So the levered beta factor for CMC, which is typically called as relevered. We call it relevered beta factor for CMC is this multiplied by 1 plus debt equity ratio into 1 minus 30%. That gives you the beta factor to be used over here. So if it is 0.57, then now 0.87, then I'm going to use this 87 over here to be able to figure out the beta factor. So this is how we typically compute the beta factors, which would flow in the capital asset pricing model. All right. So if you have to figure out the beta factor to take, which is unlisted, or basically your company is a startup and you don't have any basis, then these numbers that you see over here, you would have to capture for the listed comparable. So you must find the companies which are listed in that industry, find out their beta factors from there, and then compute the unlevered beta and use it ahead. So let me do a recap because I see a lot of questions have come up on the same logic. I will talk about it. Again, this beta factor you would find out from the website of say Money Control or any other website which is providing the details about beta factor in public domain. You could source it from there. Then the debt equity ratio of those companies would also be known to you because it's a listed company, so you would know about that. Unlevered beta you can compute by using this formula that I mentioned here. And the logic, somebody is asking what is the logic behind it. The logic is that unlevered beta is after eliminating the impact of debt component. And the debt component means the risky factor is eliminated. And when the risk is eliminated, then the beta factor is lowered. You would always see that the unlevered beta is lower than the levered beta. So we see that here. What we are doing, we're dividing it by eliminating the impact of this equity. So usually what happens is this is assuming a debt equity ratio. So if I have to reverse this, then I would reverse it by taking the 1 plus debt equity ratio. So 1 plus debt equity ratio is nothing but equal to equity plus debt divided by equity. So what it does is that it says that you take the overall funds and divide it by equity portion so that it gives you the overall asset level beta or the company level beta. And this 1 minus tax comes because along with this debt, 1 minus tax figure is included. So that is the logic behind this formula. Okay. So once you've got this, then you take an average of the listed players and then get to this level, which tells you that this is my current debt equity ratio that I'm having in CMC. And then I use the same formula that I discussed here to relever it, which eventually flows into our cost of equity computation. Right? And somebody asked this question that what if we are trying to value a startup which does not have any comparables? Then I'm sorry, we don't have a logic for it. There's no basis for us to proceed. Maybe we could look for a closest data point. If not direct comparable is available, maybe we look for an alternate comparable. If that is also not found, that is totally an unrelated area has been one. There's no basis for us in that case. If there is no listed comparable and no close comparable can be found out, maybe you assume one, or you could take the beta factor of the overall market. But that case, I would say that just ignore the beta factor, take it as one without even getting into the computations at the market level. You could do this. Because why I said market, that's another option for us because if direct comparable is not available, at least the overall market average becomes a comparable. But then taking something at an overall market level is slightly difficult for us to manage. So I wouldn't do that. And if the debt of a company Saurabh is zero, what's going to happen is debt equity ratio will be zero. And this means this 0.5 and unlevered will remain 0.5 here as well. It won't change. Right? So So if the debt component is 0, then there is no difference between levered and unlevered. Basically, both are going to be the same thing. All right. I think I have taken most of the questions. Now, Zian, to your point, how do we get information about the comparables? So, comparable is basically, it requires this understanding of the industry. There's no way that we can directly get it. But what I personally tend to do, if I have to find out comparables, then there are websites which provide this data. Like I was talking about money control in India. If you go to the money control, you look for a company and then you click on the peers, it shows you certain comparables. Those may not be perfect comparables, so you would need to apply a logic to see if I can pick it or not, but at least an initial list is given to us. We have a lot of other data sources also which provide us the comparison, right? So this is how we compute the beta factor. Now let me see a few more questions. So can we compute use index for calculating beta? You could do that. You could use the market average. That's fine. If there is an industry level beta, that will be better. But if not, then probably the index can be used. Prachi, to your point, the data sources, money control is a good data source, but when I used to work in the company, we had got access to the Bloomberg. The Bloomberg terminal provides a lot of such information, and which is typically a paid license. So if you are an independent consultant without access to it, you would not be able to refer to it. So at best, you could look at probably money control or something. But Bloomberg is definitely a good source. Excuse me. There is a question, Zayan, that do we use if you're valuing an Indian company, do we use the listed companies of India? Yes, definitely. Yes. Because the risk profile of India is different from the risk profile of the US. You have to actually be in the same country. There is this question, what is total beta? So this total beta is basically the beta at the overall level. The unlevered beta that you see, you could see that. You could say that it's the total beta at the company level. And then after you capture the debt component, it increases to a certain extent. So though we typically use the term levered and unlevered, I don't know what you mean by total here, but yeah, if I have to think about it, the total would typically mean probably something at an overall company level, which is unlevered output. And Zayan, which particular debt equity ratio do we use? Do we use the latest one or the moving one? And somebody asked this question before as well, that if there is a movement in the debt equity ratio going ahead in the capital structure, how do we handle it? The best approach is that you use the current debt equity ratio. That's one. But at the same time, you may say that, excuse me, you may argue that, my debt profile is going to change a lot. So I've got a high amount of debt as of now, but in about 1 year's time frame or 2 years time frame, I'm going to repay the entire amount because of certain reasons. So I shouldn't be using the current debt equity ratio. I should be using the future average debt equity ratio. So this is how you can capture the future changes in the capital structure. So somebody who asked this question before. So this is how you do it. That if there is a debt movement that you see in the, and that gets captured over here in the cost of equity computation. And also it would be captured in the weighted average cost of capital, because what we do at the end, after we have computed, let's say the cost of equity as a risk-free rate of 6% plus beta factor of 0.87 multiply by 9%, that gives you 13.8%. This is cost of equity. But at the end of the day, what you need to do, you need to apply a certain weight to the cost of equity and to the cost of debt. And that weight is assigned on the basis of debt equity structure. If you notice that in the future, a lot of movement is going to happen and which impacts your debt equity ratio, use future data point as a reference to compute your average debt equity ratio. Or as I said, assume a target debt to equity ratio to be used and use it over there. So let's compile all of these factors together and compute these numbers. So what is our risk-free rate? Equal to assumptions tab. We've got the data points here, 7.5%. Beta is 0.8, or you could also call it as 80%. It's one and the same thing. You could call it as 80% as well. or 0.8, and the market return is over here as 15%. And so what we need to do, the cost of equity states that you take the risk-free rate plus beta factor multiply by equity risk premium, which is market return minus risk-free rate. That gives you 13.5%. All right, this is how you can compute the cost of equity. So please write this, and then we will see how we can combine the cost of equity and cost of debt together to be able to work out the weighted average cost of capital. Yeah, so it's expected return. That's correct, sir. Now, while you're working on this, I just want to bring one factor in the light of the current situation that we are seeing because of COVID-19. You must have seen that the market has become uncertain, which means that the company's valuations should go down logically. Because you would have seen in the stock market as well, there was this huge dip in the market in the month of March, April, and then May as well, which is now gone up, and we have recovered the losses to a great extent. But at that point in time, we saw that there was such a huge uncertainty in the market because of which the stock markets nosedived. It declined drastically. And if I was doing a valuation at that point in time, I would see that if there is any uncertain environment and I'm going to be putting in my money, that invariably means I'm taking a higher risk, and that implies the cost of equity wouldn't be 13.5. I'm taking higher risk. I would add some company specific risk premium. I would take the company specific risk premium. Now it is a subjective call. It could be taken as 2%, 3%, 5%, but there's no objective approach to figure out what that number is. So it's more of a valuer's call. It's our judgment as to what we feel is the best option for us to compute the or take as a company specific risk premium in the current situation. So if I tell you, I was doing this valuation for a couple of companies and we discussed with the clients that understood their business and then took a personal decision what level of company specific risk premium needs to be taken. So we take that additionally. If it is, let's say, 2%, then I would take 13.5 plus 2, and 15.5% will become the final cost of equity. So this is how the company specific risk premium will come into picture and impact your valuation. Right? So let us proceed now. We have the cost of equity. We have the cost of debt. And in this example, cost of equity is 13.5% and cost of debt is 7%. So what we need to do, we need to assign weights. So what are those weights? If you see, we've got a target debt to capital ratio. So what is that assumption? We're saying that our target debt to capital ratio is going to be 0.5 or what you can call as 50%. Now debt to capital, the overall capital, I've got 50% debt. So my weight that I'm going to give to this is going to be 50%. So the weight that I assign to the debt is going to be 50%. And essentially that means the balance 1 minus 50%, the balance 50% needs to be given to equity. So we take a weighted average, we multiply these two, and then we take the summation, which is essentially the weighted average cost of capital, or also called as WACC, which is weighted average cost of capital, which is basically taking the cost of equity multiplied by the equity weight plus cost of debt multiplied by the debt proportion. And when you apply these weights, because that's why it's called a weighted average, because we are applying weights to both cost of equity and cost of debt. And we could use the current number, we could use the current debt equity number that we have in the balance sheet, or if it is moving, we could use the future number, or we could have a target that we want to achieve in the next 3 to 4 years of time frame. This is how we can handle it, right? So, Zian, I'm not using this by looking at the valuation. This 50% is more like a target. Like I could say that currently my debt position is 70% and 30% is equity. But on a going forward basis, I want to bring it down to the industry, and probably I would have a target of only 50% debt, 50% equity. So it is a personal decision of the management how they want to visualize it. But if you see that this is not backed by any logic, you use the future next 5 years of, we have got 2019 to 2023. Use the debt equity ratio of those years. Take the average of that and use it as a basis to compute your weighted average cost of capital. Right? And once you put those weights, I put 50% weight here and 50% weight here, you multiply these two and then get the total, which gives you the back position. Right? So let's write this formula here. It's going to be equal to cost of debt multiplied by 50% plus cost of equity into 1 minus 50%. That's 10.3% or 10.25% to be precise. All right. So please write this formula so that we can move ahead to the last point of this DCF model. So we wouldn't be able to pick, given the time, I don't think we will be able to pick the relative valuation today. So maybe in the next class, once we meet, what we will do, we will finish off this model and the remaining two files that we've got, for file number 10 and file number 11, and then we'll move on to the next topic. So next 1 hour in the next session, we'll spend on completing this. But at least let's use the next 30 minutes to finish off the file number 9. So please put the formula for WACC over here, and then we'll move ahead to the other part of the valuation. All right. So Vishakhi, I hope it is now clear why we are taking target, because as I said, you could take the actual one, but if you have a debt ratio in the next 5 years, or you intend to achieve a target in the next couple of years, you could align your number to that target. So what we have done, what we typically do as a valuer, we also consider what is expected to happen in future. Because how we are going to use it, we are going to use this percentage for the purpose of discounting. And what are we discounting? The future numbers. So the future debt equity ratio is also important. So we look at that and then work out that what's going to be our target. We align our numbers to this. Yeah, so it's more like a management assumption. Or if you would like a backing for it, look at the future debt equity ratio. So Prachi, what is the formula? Okay, I've mentioned that. Let me see. This is 19 into 20 plus 17 into 1 minus 20. Should give you the right result. Are you getting the same result here? Is your cost of equity 13.5 and cost of debt is 7%? These two numbers as well. 9.2. There's something wrong. What is your cost of equity? 13 and a half. And what's the cost of debt? Is it 7%? Okay. And your target debt to capital ratio is also 50%. The cell D20. It's 0.5, right? But it should not be this. It should give you 10.3%. Why is it giving a different result? Should not be the case. See, if this is 50-50, then it's basically a simple average of these two. 13 plus 7 by 2, that gives you 10.25 to 10.3%. if there's something which is missing, yeah, please do that. Because prima facie, it appears that if it is 13 and a half, this is right, 7.7% is also right, 50% is also correct. And these are the three numbers that we are using. So logically, it shouldn't give you a different result. Can I just request you to delete the formula here and then write it again? Maybe that, obviously, that's going to give you, should give you the same result, but then maybe give it a try. Delete this formula and try it again. So Abhijit, the levering and the unlevering part is included in the sheet number 1. I will save this file. You can have a look at this. This is sheet. This is in sheet number 1, right? Okay. So Vishakhi, I see you're saying it's becoming a bit heavy, but let me just complete this DCF at least because the topics are connected. So I want to at least cover this part. I would not cover the relative valuation today because I'm sure that will add. That would be too much of an ask for today. So let's finish this DCF and then we will wind up the topic. In the valuation sheet, Abhijit, we use that beta factor out here. You see, this is the beta factor. So all of that component will give you a final result which will flow over. That's how we use it out here to compute the cost of equity and cost of debt. No, this is not predetermined. This is what we discussed in sheet number 1. This is how you determine the beta factor. You look at the comparables, you unlever it, you relever it, and then use that relevered beta out. This is what we saw here, that this concept is used to arrive at the final beta factor to be used, which comes out. All right. Okay, so let's move ahead then. No. So Abhijit, this 0.8 is more of an assumption right now. I was actually explaining the concept in sheet number. What I'm saying is that when you do the valuation for CMC, you would need to get this kind of a data from the public domain, do this kind of a computation, get the final result. Right now, I've straight away 0.8 as an, but this would be backed by that kind of a computation, right? So right now I've taken this as an assumption, but in the real life, when you do it, you would need to look for peers and then get the data computed like this. All right, so let's move ahead. Now the next part is, if I take you back discussing the concept of discounted cash flow, I said there are two things, discounting and the cash flow. So now we have talked about the discounting concept. We've also talked about cash flow. But this cash flow is actually divided in two parts. We have the cash flows which are divided in two parts. So one is the cash flow for the projection period, which is what we have computed right now, which is the FCFF. And then there is this terminal value. There is this terminal value, which indicates the value beyond the projection period. Any value which is beyond the projection period is basically called the terminal value. So what it means is that the company is going to be run forever, because we basically work on the concept of going concern entity assumption. So we basically work on this going concern entity assumption that the business would be run forever. I'm going to be doing it forever. That's the basic premise, right? That's the basic premise for us to create the business model or the financial projections. And if the business is going to be run forever, then if I have only 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, then obviously I don't have the cash only in those years. I would have cash even beyond that. So beyond that, whatever cash I'm going to generate, that basically indicates the terminal value. So how do I compute it? Because the logic is, for the projection period, I've got a detailed financial model. This comes from financial model, right? But how do I compute the terminal value? So for the terminal value, there is another model which is used, that's called Gordon growth model, which is used for terminal value computation. So what is this Gordon growth model? What does it say? It was given by under it is given under this model that you have created the projections for the next 5 years. But obviously, you will be doing business even after the fifth year. You will do business in the sixth year, seventh year, eighth year, and for that matter, for an infinite period. You will keep on doing business for an infinite period, which means that there is going to be an infinite series of values. And for creating the projections, I don't have a basis because I don't know what I will be doing in the sixth year. I don't have a financial model for it. And for that matter, I don't know what I'm going to do in the 10 years time frame, 20 years time frame, or 30 years time frame. Because I'm saying that I would do this business forever. So I don't know what is the definition of that particular period. So it is basically the year number 6 onwards till infinity, because we are working on this concept of going concern entity. It will be run forever. But so Amanpreet, I think you have a question that why only 5 years? See, when we look at the valuation, we ask ourselves this question that is it going to make sense to assume that the business would be stabilized after 5 years? For a matured company, probably if I speak about Dabur, ITC or something else which is matured, probably it is a safe assumption that the company is matured, and I can assume that from 6 year onwards, it's going to grow at a slightly stable rate. Not an abnormal one, but a normal rate. But for a startup, probably 5 years is not a right period. For a startup, probably I would have to create a model for 10 years or maybe 15 years also, right? So in that case, what we do, we create the financial model for an extended period. Or even if I don't have an extended model or extended period model, I would have a higher assumption next couple of years. So if I'm talking about a startup and say I have the business model of that company for the next 5 years, but I know as a matter of fact that from sixth year to 10th year, the company would still be generating abnormal growth, would still be having some sort of an abnormal growth. So I wouldn't apply the normal growth from sixth year onwards. I would have a higher growth probably for year number 6 to 10, and then I would apply the terminal value. So it's more personal decision that the valuer has to take after considering the business model of the company that you are trying to value. If you are trying to value a startup company, definitely this logic will come into picture that I cannot take the stable growth rate after sixth year, because then unnecessarily I'm going to undervalue the company, which is not right. But usually, if the company is mature, then probably 3 to 5 years of time frame or 7 years of time frame is sufficient. Then you could take the Gordon growth model for terminal value computation, which states that the terminal value is equal to the terminal year cash flow, which in this example is the fifth year, into 1 plus the stable growth rate. So you would assume that after fifth year, I'm going to grow at 5%. For instance, 5% per annum, which is typically a lower rate, 4 or 5% for companies in India, divided by WACC minus growth rate. This is how we typically work out the terminal value. So in this case, the terminal value at end of year number 5 is going to be equal to cash flow of year number 5 into 1 plus growth rate, let's say 5%, divided by WACC of 10.25% minus 5%. This is how we can compute the terminal value at the end of year number 5. This is called Gordon growth model. And what it says is that you pick the last year number, which is typically maybe a stable number for us, use it to compute the future values of the cash that you would generate, and then discount it appropriately at WACC. So this is what we use in the Gordon growth model. So let me just copy this formula, come back to the valuation sheet, and apply that logic out here as to what the terminal value is going to be. So I will just cut and paste this part a little on the right hand side. It doesn't disrupt the overall working here. I will just paste it here for your reference. Let's come back here. Now we have space here. So terminal value. As I said, I would compute it at the end of the year number 5. In our example, the last year cash flow is 104. Multiply by 1 plus growth rate. Now growth rate is given here. I will pull it from the assumptions tab as 5%. Assumption taken here in the cell, the D76 right now, and now use it to compute the terminal value. So this 1 plus 5% divided by 10.3 minus 5%. That gives you the terminal growth rate. This is the formula that I put out there. Right? Have a look at it and complete the terminal value data. But at least one thing is clear, that we have computed the free cash flows for these years, and this 2080, a single consolidated value of or representing the cash flows that you would generate from 2024 year onwards till an infinite period. So this 2083 means that if you combine all of the cash flow that you're going to get from 2024, 2025, 26, 27, and for that matter, all the years in future, then that single consolidated value is 2083. Or in simple words, the terminal value indicates the valuation of the company at the end of 2023. You were to capture it this way. So from an overall perspective, I'm going to take the total of both, because we have to take the sum of this and this. Obviously, this wouldn't change in the first 4 years. There isn't anything, but only the last year number. Notice this. Only the last year number is going to undergo a change. Right? So yes, Vishakhi, this 2083 is basically the present value of the future cash flows generated by the company, or expected to be generated by the company in 2024, 25, 26, etc. That's how it is. Now, so you're saying that it is very low. I don't know if it is low or not, but I don't think that it's a low number. It's pretty high number. It's in $1 billion. It is basically a $2 billion number. So I don't know why you're calling it low. And another, so Dipankar, I see you have mentioned a point that if the WACC is more than growth rate, then it's done. But if it's the other way around, then it's not going to work. So let me actually bring it to everybody. The point that is being highlighted here is that the terminal value is equal to the terminal year cash flow into 1 plus growth rate divided by WACC minus growth rate. So if the WACC is 10% and the growth rate is 5%, then only it is coming as a positive figure, which can give us a result. If your growth rate is on a higher side and the WACC is on the lower side, obviously it gives a negative number, so it's not a sustainable. So the assumption of a Gordon growth model is that the WACC needs to be more than growth rate, only then it will work. Right? So the logic for the terminal growth rate is that we are trying to assume that this cash will keep on increasing at a certain rate forever. That is what we are doing in this model. Because we do not just do business for the next 5 years, we will do it even after 2023, and that's precisely what the terminal value reflects. Make sense? Now, what do we do here? But 2083 is the value of the company. No, this is just one portion of the value, Richie. This 2083 is just one portion, because at the end of 2023, I'm going to see 2083 for the cash flows starting from next year onwards. So apart from 2083, you also have these cash flows which are given here, right? You've got 109, 20, 102, 32, etc. That's why I'm taking the total over here, which we are going to discount now. So these numbers that you see will be discounted now. So these numbers shall be discounted. If you want, you can manually write a formula, but Excel has got a very good function which is called NPV function. So you could use NPV function, provide the rate at which the discounting has to happen, which is 3% in the current example, and then take all the values which are available in the row number 27. So these are the values which need to be discounted. The best part about NPV is it kind of discounts it accordingly out here. So the first number in the range is going to be discounted for 1 year. Second number will be discounted for 2 years. The third number in the range for 3 years, fourth for 4 years, and the fifth number in the range for 5 years. This is how the NPV functions automatically to give you the result over here. So let me just show you the formula here. That's what I'm writing in this cell. So this value that you see, 1556, is the enterprise value. This is also called as firm value. The value of the overall enterprise, overall firm. This is the firm value. But as you recollect, this firm has been funded by both debt and equity. So what you need to do, if you need to find out the equity is more like a balancing figure. So you subtract the debt component, if any, as of today. So what is the debt position as of today? This is basically current debt. What is the current debt position? I have to look at that. So the current position is 2018 debt. So we'll go back to the balance sheet. We'll look at here that the current position, which is basically the non-current liability, as 380, is going to be deducted. So this portion I would deduct. So you can, if you want, you can put that as a negative number as well, that I have to deduct it. So the current debt of the company needs to be deducted. So the way we look at it is that today, I'm talking about to end of 2018, the debt of the company is 380. If you have to go and make the payment, you will have to pay 380. So out of 1556, 380 is going to be paid towards the debt component. So today, if I kind of look at this company's valuation as 1556, then 380 out of it is basically the value belonging to the debt providers. The net value is something which belongs to equity shares, right? Abhijit, 2019 is the future value. Then we would come to this point that why not 20, 21, 22? We're talking about today, because all of these values we are bringing to 2018, we'll have to take as of today. And for us, the present value is the end of 2018. That's why I'm taking the end of 2018 over here. Right? But then the point is that today, apart from the business valuation that we arrived at by looking at future cash flows, I may have certain amount of cash in my bank account. I may have certain mutual funds. I may have certain fixed deposits. I may have got some other investments also, which I have not captured here. So now what we would need to do, we would need to add all of that. So if there is any cash, bank balance, any mutual fund investment, right? Any sort of FDs or any other investment. Sorry. So the cash and bank balance, FDs, then if you've got mutual funds, any other investments, all of that would be captured. What you do here today, I've got a cash position in the balance sheet of, you could say that this is 169. That is what we have to take as cash over here. And this is the precise reason why we don't take interest on cash. The reason for this is over this version, I had mentioned it in the red font bold here, that what to do for the interest income, ignore it. Because interest income in the future has not been captured here. The reason for that is we have taken the cash position. Today, if I have to see what is the cash, 169, what is the worth of it, 169, because interest is going to be generated in future. That's not part of operations. I'm not taking at the top. I'm taking it at the denominator and hence the overall value. Right? Now the accounts receivable, accounts payable and all that stuff, we don't have to worry about it because all of those changes have already been captured in this block. So see, when we were trying to compute the free cash flows, we already took these figures here. We don't have to worry about the accounts receivable and payables here. So we are now going to have a value which is there on a net basis, which is nothing but equity value, and this is also called as the fair value of equity shares of this company. Right? This is the value at an overall level. And today, if you have to figure out what is the value on a per share basis, you could basically take this divided by 100 million shares. So bear in mind that this is in $1,000,000. So please multiply this with 10 power 6 divided by 100 million shares, which gives you $13.5 per share. That gives you the final result out of this DCF model, that the share price is $13.5. Right? So this is a typical approach that we follow in the DCF for finding out the valuation of a company's share. And the way we start is we kind of have the financial model as a prerequisite, use the data points from there, work out the free cash flows, use the what you call as the discounting rate, which is cost of capital in this case, to compute the terminal growth rate, indicating the future period or the infinite period, and then discount it to get the present value of the overall firm, from which you deduct the current debt position to be able to see the equity component. Because we know that debt plus equity is going to be the overall enterprise. So once you deduct debt, we are left with equity. Obviously, cash, any kind of FD, any kind of mutual fund investments, or any other non-core investment if you've got. Let's say this company has got the shares of Reliance Industries Limited. That portion that I'm holding as of now would also be captured. Mutual fund investment, any other non-core investment would be taken here, which has currently not been captured at the top, because otherwise it will lead to double counting. You shouldn't do that. Right? So this is how we use this model to arrive at the share price. So that's it from my side. I am sure there are a lot of questions. Let me just go through the chat window to address those questions. I'm going to save this file, and you have complete 1 week to go through it. Please revisit the concept. Next class, once we meet, we'll proceed. We'll do a quick revision of what we have discussed in this file, and then we'll move on to the relative valuation and then run sensitivity analysis. All right. So let me read a couple of questions. Abhijit, regarding the video recording, you would need to reach out to the admin team of GT. I'm not too sure about the video. So Richie, your question is that what is this 2083? Okay, let me put it this way. So this company, as of today, is 2018, right? So this company will do business in future. Will do business in 2019, 20, 21, 22, 23, and even after that. But for the next 5 years, I have the definitive figures, what those are, but not sure what I'm going to get from 2024 onwards. So what we have done, we have used this model which gives us a single consolidated value for the cash flow that you expect to generate from 2024 onwards. And when you take the summation of all of that at the present value level, that gives you a single consolidated figure, which is 2083, which is again part of the money that you expect to receive from this company from 2024 onwards. So 2083 is basically the present value of the cash flows that you would generate from 2024 till the infinite period. So this is what it indicates. Right? Okay. Read a couple of more questions. Okay, so you're saying that they're not responding for recordings. Can I request you to reach out to Rohit Gupta? You should have the email ID of Rohit Gupta. Let me just check. I will ping it on the chat window. Please reach out to him. He should be able to help you out. Let me just check the email ID. I'm just putting it in the chat window. Yeah, that's rohit.gupta1 @in.gt.com. This is the email ID that you could use to you could reach out to Rohit Gupta and get the details about it. Okay, fair enough, Zian. I seen your point. We will see that. Vichy, yes, we are getting the present value, right? So, Arun, you're talking about pre-money valuation and post-money valuation. So, this is basically related to the investment which typically happens. So, the pre-money and the post-money is that today, if you look at this company, the pre-money valuation that has come is 1345. This is technically called pre-money valuation. It's 1345 million. Now, let's say I am going to be putting in my money in this company, and say this company is looking to expand, and this company has approached some target investors or some venture capital firm or some angel investors or some other private equity firm is going to put in $500 million into this company. So there is this proposed equity investment which will happen, and that is, let's say, $500 million. So after the $500 million would be put in, the post money valuation of this company would definitely go up to 1845 million. This is what we call as post money valuation. Because right now, if you see, we are talking about the business situation as of now. This is how our business is going to perform. And when you add the proposed equity which will come in the company, that is definitely going to increase the post money valuation. And the best part about this is that if that particular investor is using this valuation for the purpose of fresh equity infusion, what that person will do, let's put the form values here. This is 1345, right? And he's going to put in 500, so the total becomes 1845. What will happen? He will see this is the valuation, and then we will see number of shares. Let's say I put in million, right? All right. So so Abhinav, you got it right. That with each equity infusion in Geo, its valuation is increasing because every time you get a money in the company, its post-money valuation tends to go up. So what's happening? That right now I've got the number of shares out here. Let's put the absolute number. It is 100 million, right? So what the company does, that the valuation in the dollar million is given here as 500, and this company is going to put in money at a rate of 13.5. Let's say this is the price at which the company does the investment, which means that this company will be issued additional shares to the extent of 37 million out here. So the post money, after the additional money comes in this company, the number of shares will go up. So this is how the post money valuation is going to look like. Now you might wonder that if in the Reliance we've got so much of investment in the last 3 to 4 months, its valuation has gone up, but why is the share? How would the share price be impacted? Definitely, that might also go up if the valuation has a merit. But over here, if the additional equity infusion happens at the same price, then in fact the valuation remains intact, which means that the worth is 13.5 and you are putting money exactly at 13.5. So the valuation has gone up at an overall level, but at a per share level, it's actually the same. So if you see, per share is this multiplied by 10 raised to power 6 divided by this, which is 13.5. Right? So this is, I hope Arun, this explains your question. This is what we mean by pre-money valuation and post-money valuation. Great. So I think that's it from my side. Thank you very much. We have discussed a lot of questions today. It was indeed an interactive session. Now, let's just conclude the session here. I'm going to save the files. We have discussed file number 7, 8, and 9. So in fact, we've discussed only 3 files today, but don't go by the number of files, go by the logic that we have covered. So next class, when we start, we'll kind of begin with this concept of relative valuation and the sensitivity analysis, and then we'll move on to the regular part of ours, which is the next case study to be covered as part of this training. All right. Thank you very much. See you in the next week with the next topic. Thank you. Bye bye.